Are you letting everyone in, Bhumi?
Yes, Rob.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Just checking. Hunching away. Cool. So, good afternoon, everyone. Robert Futter from Cresco here, live from the Nedbank offices. So thanks, Nedbank, for putting me up this morning while we're running around town. I think we have continuously people joining, but in the interest of time, we're going to start the discussion. So thanks for joining us for the fifth webinar this year. Couple of people today who you've seen before, Keith and that, and a couple of new people in Kenneth and Taf and Olga. And today we are really focusing very much on forecasting, inconsistencies in forecasting, both on, I guess, load and generation, but mostly generation, and how that'll affect on the multi-market model. We are very aware that the multi-market model is currently a topic of much engagement, and public comments were due last week or week before. But for today's purpose, we are really focusing on the forecasting component. So in the questions in the chat, if you could focus your questions on that. I don't think, Keith, is the right time or place for us to debate the market model at the moment. So questions focused on the topic will happily be accepted. Questions outside of the topic on that one, if you could just keep them for a separate engagement. We're trying to really focus on one section today. So thank you very much for joining us. I think we have a fairly good turnout relative, and if you registered, you'll receive a recording and then take it from there. So really 5 speakers today, as always, 6 minutes of speaking, 1 or 2 minutes of questions. Please put your questions into the chat. And then I will go through it at the end of every section. So I'm going to talk really at a high level around where we see the market and where the opportunities are. I think Keith's really going to focus on the multi-market model, but really the forecasting requirements. Olga's going to touch on some of the commercial components and what does it mean for a generator, bilateral aggregator or not. Kenneth's going to talk a little bit around taking the software and forecasting and using some data points from other countries, but could be applied within South Africa. And at the end, Taf from Orion's going to talk about, how do you have to monitor this and what do you need to do at a process and a business level to make sure that you're prepared for this brave new world that we're entering into. So thank you again for joining us today. Next slide, please, Mimi. I think you go to the next slide after that. Thank you. Cool. So, I mean, at a high level, and some of you have seen this slide a few times, so apologies, but I think it works. We're really moving towards a liberalized market, a tariff unbundling, tariff restructuring. We have now NCTSA being operational. Apparently, if you have a Gulf Day, you're real, so that's great. And then we have Eskom being split into the 3 legal entities. And we have this mega flex tariff that is being applied for under the tariff plan and will be restructured. And then hopefully by 27, 28, we're going to have fully unbundled tariffs. And I think for the industry, even though as much as we might not like some of the numbers coming out, I think it's really important because it sets the scene for the liberalized market and the good work that Keith is doing there and pulling all the stakeholders and the cats that are running in different directions there. And we're going to have this concept of a day-ahead balancing market. And really the accuracy of the forecasting and the impact of the imbalances is really the topic of today as we prepare going forward till eventually we'll have a fully functioning market going from there. Next slide, please. So, and if you just click through all the little slides things. So Cresco has created a view of the market in May this year, and we've updated it now in October. And this is really taking the Eskom power stations. EAFs are not fully available publicly, but we have some numbers. And then we have a huge database of renewable projects based on our various RFP engagements. And since then, we've updated the May case. And so really the key things that have changed, and sorry, Boom's just press 3 buttons just to put everything on the screen. Thank you. There we go. No, one back. Sorry. Okay. Is really we do see the coal. So our view in May was really based on the JET program. We know that that is probably not reality, and we've created a midpoint between JET and Eskom. But you can see the coal due through decommissioning and through EAFs deteriorating on the old fleet. So we've revised that view. The second view is that we unfortunately don't believe there'll be gas in the system until 2030. That's the same as we had before. Unfortunately, we think there's just too much work that needs to be done for Eskom procured gas or private sector procured gas, and to build these facilities definitely doesn't happen as quickly as renewables. The second key change is around we've seen a delay in the renewable rollout. So a lot of projects we're involved in that hope to achieve financial close in June and then September, maybe December, and really grid-related issues is often the reason. Not always, but often that is the reason. And then we've seen a significant increase in battery energy storage. We don't really deal in the rooftop space in that, but definitely in the larger embedded clients, the value of BESS is very real. And in one of the previous webinars, we talked about the security of supply and some of the type of projects we've been doing. So if you are on our list, you can refer back to one of those webinars if it's previously interested. It is recorded, or if you please send an email to Vumi, she can send it on to you. So thank you. Next slide, please. So we've sort of modeled on an 876-hour basis the future, and I've just used 24 and 2030 as an example. And you can see the energy mix changing completely, the demand profile, lower grey mean cold, more energy. This is an average day in the year, so representation purposes, but for seasonality purposes, it can be very different between summer and winter, and also very much where you are in the grid. So these are all the dynamics, and obviously this all comes with forecasting, load forecasting, generation forecasting, and the implications that come from that. And then my final slide, and hopefully I'm just in the 6 minutes excluding the intro, is this is an extract from the system operator from September, courtesy of one of the various many WhatsApp groups that are available out there. And I think this slide really talks well to how difficult it is to balance the grid. And I think the TSO in Germiston is doing a phenomenal job of not only keeping the lights on, but making sure everything works. And without going into detail here, the green is wind, the yellow is PV. On the first day, you can actually see PV starts a little bit later in the day than you would normally expect, and that was due to cloud cover. You can see imported hydro coming in, really only getting largely involved at 11 o'clock at night as the demand in the rest of the region is met first. And then the red is pooled natural gas, but it's really the OCGTs. And although this talks a lot about the load shedding scenarios, I think that what this shows is very much how this is not a perfect science, how you can see the jagged edges in the analysis. I understand this is 5-minute data, and that's sort of the level of granularity that I think the TSO needs to help things based on that. But for us, this is what the challenge is how do you predict these little movements over the day and the severe inconsistencies? And I think this day perfectly explains how you thought you were going to get PV in the one day and maybe you didn't. We're not aware of what their forecast was and how accurate it was, so I can't talk to that. But this really sets the scene for the rest of the discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Keith and let him talk a bit about how this implication is in the market. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch off my camera, and Keith, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert. Morning, everyone. Well, afternoon now. So essentially what I'm going to talk about, if we can go to the next slide, is really around why forecasting is important. Most of you have probably seen the slide, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's essentially identifying what the model looks like and specifically how the physical platforms will operate. Essentially, the market operator develops these 4 trading platforms and specifically dealing with physical energy and capacity. So it's the day-ahead energy market, day-ahead reserve market, day-ahead intraday energy, and then, of course, the balancing mechanism. And these are just some of the channels that are developed for generators and consumers to be able to interact with one another and trade. The big kind of alternative that is on the table is the physical bilaterals on the right-hand side. Those physical bilaterals are really the long-term power purchase agreements. They don't have to be long-term. They can also be sort of short-term. But the idea is that it involves a physical commitment to produce energy and consume energy between willing buyers and willing sellers. I think the most important thing for our discussion today is the expectation that those physical bilateral parties, and specifically generators as a default, who are expected to be balance responsible, must declare that information to the market operator on the day ahead. If they are both a balance responsible party that is doing physical bilaterals as well as a market participant, someone who's willingly selling energy through the market, day-ahead market platform. They also then can say, what am I doing through physical bilaterals? What is my commitment in terms of the physical delivery? And what am I also offering to the market in terms of what can be additionally scheduled by the market? At the end of the day-ahead process, so the day-ahead process is really scheduling for bids and offers from willing buyers, willing sellers that are on the platform. We would have a schedule per trading unit, is what we call it. So it's both a generator as well as a demand side participant, identifying where the energy is coming from and to. So do we have a clear sense of what that requirement is going to be for each hour of the following day? The important thing then is that if you've got someone that is both, that they're physical bilateral they're going through the physical bilateral and in the day ahead, the combination of the two becomes the physical position that we would then treat as the scheduled generation. So, and someone that's just a physical bilateral, a generator predominantly, or a trader, their positions are then also treated as the scheduled generation, even if they're self-scheduling through the physical bilateral. Because when we now come to talk about the intraday and balancing, the important thing is that that is the position, the physical position adopted by those participants in the market. So in the intraday, what's quite important then at the moment, the way we've designed it for the market, in the market code as it stands, is that the market participants can offer and change their positions through the intraday. So if you're, let's say, a wind farm or even a solar farm, and you've seen that your ability to generate has differed as we're getting closer and closer into real time, whether the wind is stronger or less, or whether the solar radiation is different, but also from a thermal generator, whether you've lost availability or have improved because of changes in conditions, you can use the intraday to provide that additional information. Obviously, the intraday comes at a cost. It's not a free kind of service. You essentially have to then pay for those differences. So if it's additional energy, you will be rewarded, but might be at a discounted rate to how the market is, the day ahead market worked, because you've added additional energy after the market has closed. If you are supplying less, you would likely then have to buy that additional energy. But the whole idea is that because we do this intraday auction closing every 6 hours, you're able to deal with the risks as you're getting closer to real time, so that you can manage your balancing position, so that when it goes into real time and the system operator now takes over in terms of the balancing mechanism, you're less exposed to the balancing price, because a lot is going to depend on what are the other conditions in the market. Are we now running more expensive generators because the system requires it, or are we actually now having to back off a whole lot of generators because the system has moved in a different direction? And there you are exposed because of what other people are doing in the market at the same time. So it is quite important that the intraday has this capability for us to be able to manage as we're getting closer and closer to real time. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what I've just tried to do is just again highlighting the timing involved, that as we mentioned on the day ahead, we close at the current rules, we say it's 10 a.m. in the morning. We then have an interaction with the Southern African Power Pool. We try and offer energy into the SAP or ask for energy from SAP. But by 2 p.m., everyone's aware of what their positions are. So again, from the physical bilaterals as well as from the day-ahead market, there's a clear indication for every trading unit what they're expected to either generate or consume on the following day. But then we allow that we have these regular intraday schedules. So there's one at 6 p.m. That evening, also for the following day. And then on the trading day itself, there'll be a closeout at 0000, 6 a.m., 12 noon, 6 p.m., and all of them dealing with the remainder of the day, whatever's still left in the day, adjusting positions as required. But obviously, as you're getting closer and closer to real time, then there's a closeout, usually an hour before the real time hour of operation, where the system operator just doesn't allow that you're not trading anymore. The system operator is going to issue instructions to get everyone back into balance and make sure that the system is in balance. And then we deal with it after the fact throughout the balancing mechanism to see who responded to the system requirements and who caused the imbalances on the system. And that's where the balancing comes in. So on the day afterwards, we will interrogate and get all the metering information. We will then look at what the system operator instructed, who did they ask to provide additional energy or to back off, and then by 5 p.m. that evening, there's an idea of the settlement as to the overs and unders that we will then account for. So the idea there then is that there's a process that we work through every day in terms of what was forecasted and offered, and then what was actually happening, and trying to match those two up is the key component of the balancing mechanism to make sure we've accounted for that difference. So that's really what I wanted to go through today, just to get the sort of the view of the high importance of the forecasting. I think the one thing I didn't touch on is to why we do day ahead forecasting, and I think maybe that's a crucial question. Almost in any jurisdiction, any sort of market that operates around the world, there's the expectation that day ahead we need to have a high level of certainty of what's likely to happen during the course of the day. Maybe there are a few that don't, for example, Australia, where it's only indicative and everything is real time. But predominantly, most jurisdictions require that there is some day ahead indication and obligation on market participants and balance responsible parties to have determined what their position is. And that provides certainty to the system operator and to the other market participants that at least during the day, there's a high probability that you won't have a collapse. I mean, we've seen it in Australia a few times where, because we don't have a firm position day ahead, that you actually find the market having to be suspended because in real time, suddenly we discover that there's a problem. So I think it's quite an important thing to have that information and to give the system operator some idea of how it's going to manage the grid in real time as we get closer and closer to real time. Great, thanks. I think that's it from my side.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have one question, and then I see there is one question in the chat. There's a lot of AI joiners today. So the real question for you is around, I understand this concept of forecasting and stuff obviously has already been in place for Eskom for a while, and the Eskom market operator has self-dispatched its own generation, especially when we had excess generation. So how different is what you're asking for here relative to what you're currently doing at an Eskom level? I know this obviously allows a broader participation. And then a slight tweak on the back of that is, how difficult is it to get to the systems? Because I know we already have metering data and it's uploaded data, but how much is it harder to do this from a system point of view? So two bundled questions, please.
Okay, cool. So predominantly, we are already doing a lot of this internally. So the generators, the Eskom dispatchable generators, have to give us their availability day ahead for each hour of the following day and their prices. And they're actually held accountable to that through internal capacity payments. We pay for the capacity that they've declared. If they don't meet it, there's a penalty associated with that. And the same as that, we do have the balancing mechanism internally where, if they don't deliver on what was scheduled, there is a balancing impact. In the same way, we also then from, for example, the Siri wind farm, which is an Eskom wind farm, is treated the same way as IPP wind generators, that they have to forecast what they can deliver. There isn't currently a balancing impact from any of the renewable IPPs because it's not built into the contract. So the Central Purchasing Agency under the Section 34 IPPs will have to take on that accountability to manage that the forecasting information is as accurate as possible and passing that information through to the market operator. But yet a lot of that is already in place. At the moment, demand side is managed by the system operator. They forecast what the demand is going to look like. We're working on the process with distribution that they start forecasting for their expected consumption, and that starts kind of then filtering down to the operating units to start doing that kind of forecasting at a regional level. And that's quite a large amount of work and effort that has to go into looking at what consumers are going to do. But that will be an expectation of the market, that retailers, consumers, if they are market participants, they have to start indicating what they're going to be consuming and how demand responsive they might be in the market.
Cool. Thank you, Keith. So there are a few more questions coming in. I'm going to give you one more. We will try and respond to the others later or even on a follow-up. But it's from Tommy Watson here, and it's around, I guess it's around who will be eligible for balancing. Is I guess the generic question, what I'm seeing from there. So if you could just answer that, and then you're free to go.
Okay. Yeah, cool. At the moment, the way in which the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act specifies that it's generators, licensed and registered generators, traders and distributors. Licensed distributors are by default balance responsible. What we're doing in terms of the market code is we're kind of sort of saying if you're above 10 megawatts, a generator above 10 megawatts should be balance responsible, in which case they have to provide that information day ahead. If you're less than 10 megawatts, it's kind of, we're say turning a blind eye, but it's kind of built within the system for them to manage their production for their customers. But we need that information for the larger generators, so that they will be having to sign balance responsible or balancing agreements with the system, with the market operator, so that we get that information and hold them accountable. On the demand side, at the moment, as I said, only retailers and distributors and traders are balance responsible. But if a customer wants to become a market participant, they will have to be voluntarily balance responsible, because they have to take accountability for the positions that they take in the market. Otherwise, if they are behind a retailer or a trader, then the retailer or the trader is taking on that balance responsibility on their behalf.
Cool. No, thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
We will still ask some questions at the end, and there's 2 there in the section. So I'm going to hand over to Olga now, who's going to, I guess, build on what Keith has said for some other analysis. Thank you very much.
Hello all. My name is Olga Suchkova, Senior Manager at Cresco. So yeah, my plan was really to build upon what Keith just explained. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide because I think Keith covered that in sufficient detail. But yeah, that just really shows the timeline in terms of the trading day, the actual dispatch day, and the previous day when all the bidding happens within the day-ahead market. And then the intraday, sorry, apologies. The intraday redeclarations, as you can see, will start happening already on the previous day between 6 p.m. and then the 6 p.m. on the dispatch day. I think this is, and yeah, just I guess to emphasize the point that at 10 a.m. on the previous day, you need to submit a schedule for every hour of the dispatch day, right? So this is the day ahead bit of it. If we can go to the next slide, please. So really, my intention was to just discuss in greater detail, the market participation options for the private sector. There, as Keith I think alluded to, there are different options you as a private party you can take. So depending whether you're a private consumer or a private generator, obviously you might have a private bilateral PPA in place, right? And particularly for the private generators, you might just stop there, right? You have your private bilateral in place. You have an off-taker who is taking all of the, for example, it's a take-or-pay contract. So from that perspective, you are covered. You don't really need to go to a trader or a retailer or even become a market participant. There is no requirement as such. So that's one of the options for you. Obviously, from a consumer perspective, theoretically, there's also an option like this. You can potentially try and cover your full demand based on the private bilaterals. So in that regard, then you also don't need to become a market participant, and you can choose to become then a retailer client. But again, you don't have to. So from that perspective, if there's just this private bilateral space that you're in, from a generator's perspective, to Keith, as Keith mentioned, the generator then becomes the balance responsible party. So from that perspective, even though they're not market participants, they will need to provide, their schedule, the generation schedule day ahead, and that will be that will be a binding type of agreement. So you can treat this kind of schedule as a forward contract, right? So you commit to deliver that generation, and should there be an imbalance, that will call for an imbalance settlement. So because you chose not to be a market participant, an implication is that you won't be able to participate in the intraday market schedule revision, right? So for you, that will be unavailable. And this again then brings us to this whole accuracy topic, where it becomes particularly important for you to get it right day ahead, because you will not have a chance to revisit those schedules. So from the private consumer perspective, if you just stay within the private bilateral space, you are not a balance responsible party, and then you just provide a forecast, a consumption forecast. And again, if you're large enough, so you will need to do that, but that will not be binding. So Another option is obviously for you to become a market participant. So have a private bilateral contract in place. And in addition to that, also become a market participant. So that option, again, is available to both consumers and the generators. From the generator's perspective, now, sorry, just a step back. So as Keith mentioned, as soon as you decide to become a market participant, that calls for you to become balance responsible party straight away, right? So one thing comes with the other. So from the consumer's perspective, if you choose to become a market participant, that makes you balance responsible straight away. And the generator, well, nothing changes from the balance responsibility perspective. They just continue being balance responsible for their own schedule. And the difference here, the critical difference is that now, being a market participant, you have this access to the intraday markets, and then you will be able to redeclare your position and ultimately, closer to real time. And then going back to the consumers, now you become market participants, and now you become a balance responsible party. And obviously, from that perspective, now you need to start submitting day-ahead schedules. You will also have access then to the intraday market, and you can then review your consumption closer to real time. And then finally, both private consumers and private generators can have a private bilateral contract in place and in parallel become a retailer client. So obviously that speaks more to the consumers. Whatever they cannot get from their private bilaterals, they can get from a retailer. By the retailer, we really mean in a broader sense. So that can be both your regulated and unregulated retailers, in the sense that can be ESCOM distribution or your municipality in the regulated space, or the likes of your current traders from the unregulated space, what we call. So from that perspective, as Keith mentioned, the retailers will take upon that scheduling and balancing responsibility on your behalf. They will be the market participants. You will be the clients, and they will do scheduling and balancing on your behalf, but obviously they will be charging you for that. And depending on the type of the retailer, it will either come through the regulated tariffs. Those costs will be just included in there, or as a separate charge, if it's more like a trader type of arrangement, retailer. What is important to note is, according to the current version of the market code, you will not be able to participate in procure your energy from all three of those, let's call them broader areas. So you won't be able to have a bilateral contract in place, be a market participant, and be a retailer client all at the same time. So that will not be allowed, and that is something just to consider. Next slide, thanks. So I just really wanted to quickly, discuss the implications. So both from the generator perspective and from the consumer perspective, and I'm using Keith's graphs that he was showing during the workshops, the market code workshops, but really just to convey, I guess, the message, how important, how exposed you then become to the different prices. So Keith also touched on this, and maybe this is just an illustration. So first let's maybe discuss the IPP or the generator. So you as a private generator. So this slide focuses, you have a private bilateral in place, but then you decide not to become a market participant. So from that perspective, what is important to consider is your scheduled energy, what is called the instructed energy, and then the actual energy. So obviously the scheduled energy is what you submitted in terms of your schedule, right, in the day ahead market. Then when discussing the balancing, it is very important to differentiate between, whether the deviation from your schedule was actually called by the system operator. This is what is called on instruction. So the system operator asked you to deviate, and you just did that. So that basically implies that you were on instruction, or otherwise, there could be some internal reasons why you had to deviate, and then it's against instruction. And that becomes critical because that makes you exposed to the different prices within the market. And then actual energy is the actual metered energy, so in real time what you delivered, right? So going back to our scenario where IPP just is a private bilateral PPA is within the private bilateral PPA contract, and they're not market participants. So as mentioned, they will not be able to redeclare. So whatever they submit day ahead, they become balance responsible for that schedule. And as you can see, let's maybe first focus on the additional generation on and against instruction. As you can see, there's a difference. So if you were asked to generate more and by the system operator, then you will be reimbursed as per the price curve, the piecewise price curve that you submitted. So basically, that will reimburse your costs. If and regardless whether you manage to meet the actual instruction that was provided by the system operator, even if you failed, still for whatever you managed to provide, you will be paid, right? If that was against the instruction, then this is when the balancing price comes in. So because you generated more, you will be rewarded for that. You will be paid for that energy. But because it was not really asked by the system operator, there will be a discount to the price that you will receive, right? And then on the right, these are basically the decreased generation on instruction and against instruction. And as you can see, if you were asked to back off and decrease less, then you will get to keep this lost profit. So you will pay back the market operator as per your price curve, but then the difference between the S&P and your price curve is this profit opportunity that you will get to keep, right? And then if that was against the instruction, again, you then become exposed to the balancing price for the full amount, right? So the full deviation, then you will need to pay back to the market operator as per that balancing price. And just one last comment on this slide is really on this metering accuracy band. As you can see, you can stay within 5%. That will not call for this balancing mechanism. But as soon as you deviate 5% either way, up or down, then you become exposed to the balancing mechanism. Next slide. So obviously that changes slightly when you become a market participant, as I mentioned. So then you become, you get the success to the intraday market, and you as a market participant, you in those time frames, right? So 6 p.m., midnight, 6 a.m. to noon, and 6 p.m. on the trading day, you will have those time slots when you can redeclare your position. And the intention is not to change the S&P, so that's why the S&P will remain the same, but you can tweak your schedule, right? And as Keith said, you will still need to, that will come at a cost, but and as you can see, again, it's just important to differentiate whether that change in your schedule was on instruction or against instruction. And if it was on instruction, similar to the previous scenario, you just get paid your costs, right? Your incremental price. If it was against instruction, then you just basically receive the additional revenue, at the S&P price, at the market price. And then in terms of the decreased schedule, so again, on instruction is very similar to the previous scenario. And if you are against instruction, this is when, the new price will be established in the day ahead market. Because potentially what happens here is that you had to back off. It was against instruction. The system operator didn't ask for it. So now they just need to go ahead and find another generator to fill the gap. And potentially that might be a more expensive generator. So that might require, this increase in the price. And you obviously causing that disruption in the market, you will need to pay the cost. So this is basically what will happen in that scenario. And
Olga, I'm gonna catch you a little bit. Well done. I know you are very focused on this topic and that, so thank you. I think we're going to try and get in. There is a few questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to just do an answer to one of them. So Jacques and Frank around how do IPPs fit within this. Cresco is forming a view. We're working for a number of clients in terms of how to understand as a load and as a generator, how do you fit into that? So we won't touch on that today, but it is a very good question. And we're still working on exactly what the implication is and how this affects a trader's business and things like that. And there's a fair bit of analysis that is happening. So I won't answer that specifically. But the last question for you, Olga, because I don't think there's anything, a couple of ones that I'd rather we didn't answer today, is around what would you do if you're a load or a generator, and I know we're currently doing work for Sexum in terms of preparing for this market, and what type of work are we doing for the client into preparing for this?
Yeah, so obviously, I think Taf is going to touch upon that point as well. But basically, yeah, you will need to have all the necessary capabilities within your company. So if you do decide to become market participants, then obviously you need to be able to forecast. You need to have all the necessary systems in place to do that. You will also need to have market participation will come at a cost. A credit cover will be required, which will need to be arranged with the eligible bank. You need to be aware of all the changes that will be taking place in the industry. So quite a number of regulatory changes will need to take place that will change dramatically the wheeling framework, the way tariffs are going to be structured. So all of that just needs to be taken into account. And potentially from the market participation perspective, there might also be some kind of certification that will be required. So that's just something, again, some training, and then ultimately certification, getting certified to be market participants. This is not in the current version of the market code, but we were discussing that potentially that will be required going into the market.
Cool. Thank you, Olga. Great presentation. I'm going to kick you off the slide deck, if that's okay, and let Kenneth come in and talk about accuracy of forecasting, and then we'll try and capture one of some of those questions right at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Next slide.
Can you pop on your... Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
And next slide again. Great. Hey, nice to connect with everyone. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm a new face for this series. I'm the Global Director of Grid Solutions at UL Solutions. We've been providing wind and solar power forecaster, you see it described as VRE, Variable Renewable Energy Forecast, for over 25 years. We do that for market operators, for transmission operators and system operators, utilities, and also generators, independent power producers, and asset owners. So we've been at this for quite a while. We're presently doing this for, this is a bit old, 3,300 wind farms and solar plants across the globe, and we're at about 250,000 of rooftop PV systems to understand load offset. And that totals 195,000 megawatts of installed capacity. So we have a fairly robust system. So just with that in place, hey, we're fairly good at this. So next slide. Everything that we've seen so far, Robert did a great job, Keith, great job, Olga, great job. Very specific information on the multi-market model. Some great schematics as far as what you can expect from the market. I'm here to introduce variability, right? The fact of the matter is, when we talk about weather forecasting and trying to predict the future, there are many unknowns. What you have on the screen here is the wind speed at the hub height of the wind turbine. And here's an output from many different weather models, right? So we bring in all these sorts of atmospheric weather models, global and regional models, into a forecasting system. This is the data that's going in. You can see quite a wide spread. The forecast was produced at time 0. And you can see wind speed on the y-axis with the meters per second. And right around maybe hour 18 or so, we start to see a sign. Oh, it looks like there's going to be an increase in wind speed. There's going to be a wind ramp. The exact timing of when that occurs is somewhat unknown. The magnitude or the amplitude of that ramp is also unknown. And then very quickly thereafter, we get into a state of uncertainty among all of those models. And then maybe again, close to hour 44 or so, we again have a chance for an up ramp, but the models are even more uncertain. So the point of this is for me to introduce to you the concepts of variability, of uncertainty within forecasting, what type of accuracy you might be able to expect, and decision-making, ways that you can use forecasts for more than just straight deterministic decision-making. Next slide. This will be the most precise graph that I will show. And you can see a number 1 over there. It's called NWP data, right? So numerical weather prediction model data. These are physics-based models of the atmosphere. These are the weather forecasts that you get day in, day out. Certainly, these are the closer you are to the time of forecasting, the more accurate you will likely be of a forecast. The further out in time the forecast looks, the generally speaking, the less accurate you will be. So we do a lot of things in a forecasting system, and this is a generalized approach here. This is what we are doing, but in general, this is what forecast vendors will do. We've got all this weather data. We run statistics and machine learning processes. We take data from the generation facility, the wind or solar plant. We want to know what the availability of it was. We want to know how much it generated. We want to know if you have a wind speed measurement that we can integrate into our model, or a GHI or radiance measurement as well. Satellite data is very useful, right, for very short-term purposes. But we have a very precise approach. We bring this all together and we try to optimize our output, when in fact, step number one is where most of the variability is introduced and the uncertainty is introduced for that day ahead time frame, or longer, right? Week ahead, month ahead, and so on. Next slide. So how accurate are forecasts? Well, let's talk about wind forecasts first. The graph on the left, which you can see, is a green line that represents the capacity factor of the wind farm. You can see the bars, blue and red, are representing the hour ahead forecast accuracy and day ahead forecast accuracy. And that's mean absolute error expressed as a percentage of plant capacity, right? So when we look at capacity factors, you can see on the y-axis on the right, we've got a fairly good variability throughout the months of this particular plant. You can see that the high capacity factor months usually result in a worse forecast accuracy, which is represented on the left side of the graph. You can see the MAE there. So what we have, high capacity factor, so great wind, poor forecast accuracy. And the lower capacity factor months, we have a bit better forecast accuracy. So why is that? You can see on the graph on the right, what we have is a generalized power curve in the black, and the blue dots represent observations of wind speed, meters per second, compared to power output. We've got a fairly tight group around the power curve, but you can see kind of a shadow power curve to the right that starts around 6 meters per second. You've got a lot of float in that data as well. And this is unscreened data, right? We would normally screen out erroneous values. You know, we're not going to have a 4 meters per second wind at producing at I'm sorry, excuse me, a 20 meter per second wind producing at 4 megawatts. So we can screen some of that out. But what we are faced with is a very steep part of the power curve. We look at, say, 9 meters per second to 10, and you can change 15% of the plant capacity. So a 1 meter per second miss on your forecast can result in a fairly big change in generation. The next slide. Let's talk about the solar forecast side of things. Solar forecast is the exact opposite, right? The higher the capacity factor, the more accurate we are. I won't get into the graph on the left for sake of time, but if you look at the graph on the right, why is it that the higher capacity factor or more sunny days are easier to forecast? Well, that's exactly it. When you have a pure sunny day without clouds, we're very good at predicting that, right? We can determine what the generation is going to be. In the red line, we've got a day that is partly cloudy, right? And about, we'll call it around, midday. We start to see the introduction of some variability. You see that red line start to dip. We have a weather system moving through, right? So the exact timing of that weather system moving through, those clouds, and how those clouds are going to transect over your plant, how they're going to, at the angle of the sun, as well as how those clouds form and dissipate are all very difficult to predict when you're talking about a day ahead forecast. So catching the exact ramping of that partly cloudy or that weather system moving through is difficult. And then you can see in the blue, obviously, a somewhat fairly very cloudy day is also challenging. So wind, the higher the capacity factor, the less forecast accuracy you're going to have. Solar, the higher the capacity factor, the better forecast accuracy you'll have. Next slide. This is a slide generalized of forecast accuracy. Yes, it's out there, right? Let's talk about what one can expect. Very short term, look ahead forecast. You can expect fairly good. Again, this is a mean absolute error expressed as a percentage of plant capacity. And as you get out into that next day range, you start to approach those double digits for an individual site as far as the MAE goes. And this is annualized, right? This is over a year. So there will be periods where you are much better. There will be periods where a forecast will perform worse. And it depends on where your plant is, right? What's the complexity of the terrain? How difficult is it to forecast? Are you in a shoulder month as far as moving from one season to another? These impact the weather, and they impact the ability of our physics-based weather models to be able to predict those changes. Capacity factor and weather variability, we mentioned extreme events. There are periods when you have extreme events that are not ordinary, right? We call those the tail events, things that usually don't happen, but sometimes do. Those are very difficult to predict. And they're very difficult to predict next day in the exact timing when they start, what the amplitude is. So that can have challenges. Quality of data from the from the plant, right? We do want to get signals from the generating plant that will go into the forecast. So will help train the forecast models. And then you can see at the bottom, right, the frequency of curtailments, maintenance. How is the plant operated? Is it often down? Is it up a lot? Do we have good data coming in? Can all be limitations on forecast accuracy. Next slide. Okay, to this point, we've talked about a forecast that is a deterministic forecast, and this is where decision-making comes in. You can have a specific value, your power output will be X at this time. That's your generation forecast, and we can forecast meteorological variables as well. So decision-making on that, yes, you have a data point, and we know that there is uncertainty in that because of the process of forecasting. That's inherent in forecasting. There are a lot of other data points as part of a forecast system that you can leverage, right? If you have an understanding of uncertainty of that prediction, would you schedule your power differently? How would that change your risk proposition of how you want to bid? Do you want to have a probability of exceedance value or confidence band around that deterministic value that says, hey, we're 90% confident that at least this amount of generation will show up, and we're only 10% confident that over this amount will show up, right? So you can start to put bands of uncertainty introduced into your decision-making process, and that all depends on what your downstream processes are, right? So this is introducing variables that can add value to your decision-making process beyond just a deterministic forecast. Event forecasts as well, very specific events that might have impacts on your bidding or your operations. And then finally, situational awareness. Think of a weather map moving through the area. Sometimes that's useful for decision makers to see. You can just have more of a broader view. Next slide. And we'll be wrapping up here in just a moment, but look, how can we extract more value from the forecast, right? There are limitations on what the accuracy can be. We will continue to strive to be as accurate as possible, and I can speak on behalf of the industry. The state of science continues to move forward, and state of the art in how we display that data, how we our compute time is going down. We're able to throw more algorithms into the process. We will continue to try to be more accurate, but there's a lot of value in the forecasting system that you can extract, right? There's probabilistic forecasts that give you that spread of uncertainty, and how that can be applied in your downstream applications is important, something for you to think about. The more effective you want to be at using your forecast data, the more complex the data we extract out of the forecasting system, but how that data is displayed and how you can use it. Have a discussion with a forecast vendor and find out what type of data can be extracted, explain your challenges, and try to come to a common point on what can add the most value to your decision-making process beyond a simple deterministic forecast. Next slide.
I'm going to cut you off here if I can. Okay.
Yep.
Your slides will be available, and I think that was a great presentation. Thank you. So one comment and one question for you before we give Taf the graveyard shift on the presentation. So what amazed me was I got quite addicted by the America's Cup this year and the racing, and how much wind can vary in a 25-minute race across a 1.5 meter stretch, right? And for me, that was, and you see the weather coming in, so I can understand it's by all means not a perfect science. But the question for you is around, you've heard from the team earlier how the REAP projects were really the only generators we have in in South Africa at the moment, how typically they don't forecast, but there's no real penalty. It's like, oh, sorry, I got it wrong, a little bit thing. So with the multi-market model coming and we know CPA needs to manage it, how would they change their view of the accuracy of the forecasting? And so what would they have to do to start being more accurate for that? And obviously REAP are the ones currently in the ground, but I'm talking more about private sector ones that are going to be built and come operational over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Yeah, I think looking at this from two angles, Robert. One is making sure that you have measurement points at your generating facility. So think of wind speed measurements, wind direction. You can add in other measurement points like temperature and humidity that might add some value as well. That data should be transferred to a forecast vendor for inclusion in their forecasting system. The more specific training data a forecast vendor has from the wind farm or solar plant, right, if it's an irradiance value, the more we can train our models up and the better our predictions will be. That really helps out with removing biases from those physics-based weather models, and it also increases our power conversion process. The other thing that can be done is understanding how you want to make your decision making and what data points are going to be most important to you. Yes, a deterministic forecast is important, but understanding that is one day more risky than another. Understanding is in the front half of the day or the back half. When's your trading window? So it's having a real hard discussion with the vendor to understand what data points are going to be most accurate and extracting the value out of the forecasting system, because it's not a straight line from forecast to scheduling and bidding. There's too much risk involved. Let's make sure you get more information and you can use that in a meaningful way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We're going to call it there for you all done. Thank you very much for the presentation. And Taf, if you can do 7 minutes, we can have 1 minute for a question. Thank you.
I'll try and push it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taf Mukwena. I work for Orion, which is an independent asset management company for the renewable industry. And really, I think, obviously, picking up from what's been said in the discussion, there are quite a few points around how to get from that forecast to a real actual business operation that delivers on the actual power that you want to put into the grid. Ultimately, the forecast itself isn't the end goal. It's just the beginning. So we'll walk through that. For me, if you can go to the next slide. I think Keith and Olga also discussed the issue around the fact that you're going to have to end up with taking a forecast into an offer that eventually gets scheduled at a point in the day, so that in the next day you'd be able to dispatch. That means that you're making that decision from what Kenneth has said on probably the or less accurate forecasting data. That sets you up to participate in the market, but inevitably there's a potential around imbalance in that. And you as a generator, in the instance that I'll discuss, should be looking to have a position to play in the intraday market so that you can correct for those imbalances, especially obviously where they result in cost on your side. And the ability to do that really comes down to creating an operation and a process within the business that takes the day ahead forecast, lets you offer to be a participant in the market on the day, and then looks at the opportunity between when you receive the schedule at 2 o'clock and when you start the intraday market reschedule that evening and into the next day with the reschedule windows, an ability to relook at your position and try to get the maximum amount of your energy into the grid at a price that will make a return for you. That in itself requires quite an intricate management process, but an understanding also of the change in the accuracy of those forecasts as you get closer and closer to the time when your offer will be available to the market. If you can go to the next slide, please, women. I think Olga also then touched on this, is obviously those imbalances have a material effect on the price you're going to get and the volume of power that you can put into the grid. So as you get through the day, and especially if you can become a market participant, you have the advantage that you don't have to look at your day ahead forecast and eat the imbalance irrespective of what has happened during the day that you're actually dispatching. Ideally, if you're a market participant and the ability to trade on the intraday market arrives, you will have the advantage of using more accurate forecasts during that day to reposition yourself, to close out positions, or to maximize positions that will result in your total revenue increasing. Ultimately, the benefit for everyone is that the system is better balanced, but also for you as the market participant and as a generator in the instance I'm referring to, you will be in a position to maximize your revenues. So it all does begin with the forecast. If you can go to the next slide for me. It does begin with that forecast and trying to get inside of that day and the accuracy that you get from that. But again, with the market operations being on a 1 month billing, ultimately every participant has to have a sort of a view around how their month will proceed, which is again input from your forecasting on a seasonal basis and on the month ahead basis, and look at your opportunities around when to participate in the market, compare that with your actual operational performance on the plant, and when you believe you can maximize your production and sell more into the market. So there is also the physical side of the generation curve that you have to think about. As much as the forecast sets you to be a participant, the ability to deliver against it is what then closes out the risk around forecasting. So from an asset management point of view, I think there really is an obligation and a requirement to, one, tighten up operations on the generation side, and then have a workflow that allows you to take advantage of the intraday changes in your ability to generate and put them to the market so that you minimize those imbalances in your trading position. Intricate as it is, I think all of us have to sort of prepare for that going forward, and be in a position to really take advantage of the market as it stands. I think, Rob.
Thanks, Taf. A quick question for you. Sorry, I might have cut you off there, but how do you see this changing from a traditional asset management in terms of processes and systems?
I think there will always be the focus on the traditional side, which is around the technical piece and making sure that there's delivery around that. I think the focus becomes much greater because the more you can reduce variability from your forecast and the ability to deliver into the market, the better able to trade you will be. So that tightens up that focus, and then it introduces the intraday piece where you're going to have to actually look at performance not on a day-to-day basis, but inside that day, and an ability to maximize on a trading position because we feel there's an opportunity in the market.
So I imagine the systems and processes are a bit on steroids from where we are now, where we kind of wait for the end of the month. Now
I did see
real time, right?
I did see a question in the chat around whether this will be on Excel. Hopefully, definitely not. If you're going to try and do this in Excel, I think the intraday market will leave you more imbalances than you're trying to close out. So everyone does have to ramp up the level of sophistication around how you participate and how you deliver.
Brilliant. Thank you, Taf. So there is one question I'd like to put to Keith, which is, I think, relevant. And sorry, Taf, I've stopped you from your last slide. But as I said, we will try and answer these questions, and the slides will be available if you registered. And Keith, if you wouldn't mind taking it quickly for the last minute, it's around the market surveillance role. And Olga talked about if you don't do what you said you do, there's a practical penalty. But how do you talk about that? I know we touched on that on Wednesday when we chat. Maybe you could just touch on that specific market surveillance role. Thank you.
Yeah, don't forget, market surveillance is not about balancing. So balancing, I mean, there's automatic mechanisms to deal with overs and unders and stuff, but market surveillance is around if there's perceived behavior that is considered counter to the market. So I think one of the great examples of that is if someone is manipulating the potential, if we have a constraint in the system and they are deliberately making themselves available when they know the constraint is most binding, and actually avoiding the rest of the day, and then finding themselves being paid out under the constrained payment for that. So that's kind of the famous Enron case in California, where they were almost fictitiously creating a constraint that didn't actually exist in order to be paid out. So that's the kind of thing that the market surveillance to be looking at, is looking at behavior in terms of bid strategies. Are bid strategies deliberately designed to find loopholes in the market, kind of trying to create an environment where they can game the system? And so the market surveillance unit is meant to be part of the market operator. That is a function that is constantly just churning through large data sets looking for those kind of behaviors. It might manifest through balancing, where someone is deliberately forecasting incorrectly in order to try and game the system by capturing as much of the balancing price if there's a benefit to be had. So that's one of the important things of having that kind of information, that we're able to process and then provide evidence that there is someone who is now countering the market, sort of the expected market behavior. So then the idea is that you have a market surveillance panel, which is appointed by NERSA, which really looks at those sort of disputes and events that might be happening, and can then come up with the appropriate kind of remedy if someone is trying to game the system.
Cool. Thank you very much, Keith. So we've got 1 minute past the hour. I know everyone's got the next team's call to attend, so we really appreciate all the speakers. This is going to be the last webinar for Cresco this year, but January we'll have a few more hopefully relevant bits. As I said, if you registered, you should receive a recording. We will try and answer as many of the questions in our feedback session. I know Vumi's taking notes and will allocate it. And those we can't answer, I'm being a bit facetious here, but happy to send a Cresco proposal to help you with those. But thank you very much. I hope you took some value from that. Have a great day. Thank you.